Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film The Guest. The Guest is the kind of great genre filmmaking that makes you love genre filmmaking. It's an incredibly well-made, well-constructed, beautifully directed piece of genre filmmaking. Adam Weingart, who previously directed You're Next and had a lot to do with the VHS series, directs this film with his usual screenwriter Simon Barrett. It shows the promise of Adam Weingart, and it shows an improving genre director. Adam Weingart, his last film, You're Next, I thought was great, but it was almost like too genre for me. Like, I almost didn't like that. And this is the opposite of that, where I can tell a director is so comfortable in being a genre filmmaker. He knows impeccably well how to make a genre film. Adam Weingart constructs this so perfectly. It's like he knows the bare bones and the blueprints of genre filmmaking and knows how to control them. He directs this so immaculately well. And I think this is probably one of the best action movies I've seen this year. It's definitely right up there with The Raid 2 and Captain America: The Winter Soldier. So I guess it's my favorite non-sequel action film if you really think about it. David, who one day shows up at the Peterson household, knocks on the door, the mom enters, and he explains that he was a friend of Caleb, their son, who died while being stationed in the army in the Middle East. He even shows them in a photo that they have on their mantelpiece that they were friends. They're hugging each other, they look like friends, they're on the same squad, and he came to tell them that Caleb's last words, which was that he loved them. And eventually they ask him to stay with them. David, who's very charismatic, very charming, very polite, helps the Peterson family out in many different ways. The dad complains about how he'll never be regional manager because he doesn't have a certain degree that the current regional manager has. Suddenly the regional manager is dead. The son has trouble with bullies, so David goes and beats up the bullies who are on the football team for the son. He always helps out, but he leaves a bloody trail behind him. And this keeps happening, and they're starting to wonder, what is David's secret past and what exactly is he up to, especially as the daughter Anna starts to realize that David might not be this charming house guest that his parents think he is. I think with a lot of genre filmmakers, especially ones that are very influenced by John Carpenter, and this film is extremely influenced by John Carpenter. It uses the Carpenter font at the beginning. If you look at the poster, The Guest, that's John Carpenter's font. The score, although it's made by many different artists, is cut to sound a lot like John Carpenter. If you listen to the soundtrack album, it doesn't sound as much as during the film. Probably the closest soundtrack I've heard to sounding like John Carpenter possibly ever. But the problem with people who were influenced by John Carpenter is with John Carpenter and Spielberg and all those people, what happened in the late 70s and in the mid 70s, there are a lot of directors who grew up watching B movies but were A-level directors, and they directed B movies at an A level, and that was the whole big deal. That's how Blockbuster started, that's how Halloween happened. Alien who used similar ideas from B movies in the 50s. If you look at those movies, they're not as scary because they're directed like B movies. And what had happened in the late 70s is you had all these up-and-coming directors who they grew up loving these B movies, and they understood film history. So if they knew X and Y, they knew that V and W led into X and Y and exactly why that is, and had theories behind that. My usual problem with genre filmmakers now who are influenced by these people is they get the influence, but they don't get how the influence happened, the way those directors in the 70s did. I feel like I'm criticizing these guys the same way that critics at the time would, that they don't really understand the films that they're referencing. I don't think that was true at the time, but I do think that's true of a lot of genre filmmakers now. And initially I thought about that with The Guest, that he doesn't really get that Carpenter, most of his films had a strong Western influence, and they're not just a simple horror movie. A lot of times they're kind of like this weird postmodern masterpiece. The Guest, at first glance, and I still loved it when I saw it, I didn't think it did. But the more I thought about The Guest, I realized, holy shit, this is fucking Shane. This is evil horror movie Shane. It's like if Shane and the stepfather had a baby, it would be really messed up, but it would be The Guest. And that's the genius behind Adam Weingart did. He got what is the problem with all these extreme genre filmmakers, and he understood how to make this kind of film. That's why The Guest is so much better than You're Next, and so much better than a lot of genre filmmakers nowadays. It started to occur to me, holy crap, he really gets how to be a B movie maker, more so than a lot of B movie makers do. The Guest almost feels like a movie that was extremely influenced by Carpenter in 1987 or 1986, mid-80s, let's say, and especially with the soundtrack, which is very synth, but has that kind of like mid-80s feel to it. It feels like someone who really is a huge devotee of Carpenter. I've reviewed every Carpenter movie ever. I'm a big Carpenter fan, and I know a lot about John Carpenter, and I can tell you this guy really gets it. He uses classic film influences, especially with the blue eyes. A couple of critics have noted Once Upon a Time in the West with Henry Fonda, and how they're using Dan Stevens, who traditionally this is not the role he's known for. He's known from Downton Abbey, which I haven't really seen Downton Abbey, but from the little clips I've seen of him in Downton Abbey, this is a remarkably different performance. But the way they're using what he's known for as kind of an evil person, I mean, you almost root for him but don't. I heard an interview with Adam Weingart where he kind of wanted to make the character of David like a friendly Mike Myers. That's exactly what he is, but you're almost like rooting for him. It's more than Jason and Michael Myers, because those look like killers. I almost feel like I don't come to terms with him as a villain, because I get that he's doing evil things, but I still think he's the coolest motherfucker in the world. I read a lot about how Adam Weingart combined this kind of like the idea of the Terminator and Halloween were two Blu-rays he had bought and were watching a lot, and that really influenced this film, and you can really tell he has that kind of Terminator way about him. Dan Stevens does a great job. He's an English actor. You couldn't tell in this film whatsoever. This is a star-making role if I've ever seen one. I don't see that many action stars pop out like Dan Stevens did in this movie. I mean, he's just so charismatic and so evil. He does a real physical, commanding performance. There's a lot of layers to that performance that make it so cool and make him so captivating and make him basically make the movie. You need that star kind of presence throughout it, and he uses that and does it such an amazing job. It's one of probably the biggest star turns I've seen this year and in a long time, especially in an action movie. This film takes place during Halloween. You saw that in the Lethal Weapon films where they would have, I think Lethal Weapon 2 took place during Thanksgiving and the first one was Christmas maybe, or like Batman Returns takes place during Christmas. It adds a kind of weird holiday ambiance to films when you do that. They have a really cool set piece with a Halloween maze, which is just completely incredible. I think they use the holiday very well to suit their means. They do film this in the desert, so it does have a Western quality to it, which again kind of goes into the Carpenter thing. I think this is probably the best Carpenter influence I've seen in like forever. There's certain points where it's so much of a perfectly constructed genre film. I really loved it and I was laughing, and even though I had to pee during a majority of the movie, I held it because I love the movie so much. It kind of has this weird thing towards the end where it kind of just stops being a perfectly constructed genre piece and then becomes just like a typical genre film towards the end when you have like, you know, this militia show up. I get what they were doing, and certainly like theoretically it made sense, and what the film they're making, it made sense, but it did feel like certain parts weren't as well made and as well constructed of a genre film. It felt like it just became a regular genre film during some of those action sequences, but then others it would kind of switch back for me. But I felt the part with the militia just became a normal genre film, and it felt like a decent genre filmmaker, but just a genre filmmaker that I saw with You're Next. And then the rest felt like the director of The Guest, even though it's the same guy, but it felt like the director I loved with The Guest, the Adam Weingart I really liked. And there are certain parts where he goes back to that. It's not a huge complaint, but it definitely felt like the quality of the film almost like dipped. Theoretically, I guess I can't really have a problem with it because it is a genre film and it feels like it is at home in those places, but it did feel like the film just went to like its typical conclusion rather than doing things where I was like laughing and so in love with, I can't believe a film's doing this again, to parts where I was like, oh yeah, I guess this is where it's supposed to go. I thought this was very well made, probably better made than I see a lot of B films, but I think he is really on the precipice to being with those filmmakers that influence him. I think he's on that path, and I'm excited to see where he goes next. But I think that's the one thing with The Guest is, as well made as it is, it shows a filmmaker that still has room to develop, certainly, but it's at the top of his class in terms of genre filmmakers at this day and age. I think he's certainly getting why certain genre films were so important and impactful. And it's interesting to hear him talk about film theory, and not just because that's something I like, but because I think that actually does make the film better when you understand why you're using certain things. It's one of the best synth soundtracks I've heard since Drive. It is as catchy as the soundtrack of Drive. I had to get the soundtrack right when I got home, just like Drive. The filmmaking itself is stylized, but I don't think it's as stylized overall as Drive is, certainly, but that's not the point. It's really trying to be a great little genre film. What Adam Wingard does in this film is simply amazing and awe-inspiring, and it shows what a great genre director can do. And you can see through this that he's influenced by Carpenter and Walter Hill and early James Cameron. And all those things I loved growing up with, watching VHSs in my basement and then buying the Blu-rays later. And Adam Wingard shows all of that and does that in the way that the people who made those films did, because they were watching midnight movies in their basements. And it kind of shows a natural evolution to the style in a way that a good genre filmmaker, a good student of filmmaking should be. And you can tell Adam Wingard is on that path. He shows that so well through The Guest, and does that so well with the action sequences and how intense it is and how well built it is. It's just one of those incredibly well-made action films that is so captivating and fun and silly and ridiculous, but it gets all of that right, and you get a really amazing piece of genre filmmaking that The Guest thrives in and excels in, and makes an action film that I think I would want to watch with my friends just the way I watched those classics before. So if you have seen The Guest and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. I hope I don't sound too sick. I'm a little sick.